After a minute's wait, the mistress of the house appeared. She was a middle-aged woman who was wearing a sort of nightcap, which she had hurriedly stuck on her head and a strip of flannel around her neck. She seemed to be of that species of small lady landowner that keep complaining about poor crops and losing money and that hold their heads slightly to one side while on the sly they are accumulating cash kept in little patchwork bags cached away in various drawers. One bag may contain rubles, the next half rubles, the third quarter rubles, although at first glance the drawer might look as if it contained nothing but sheets, linen, nightdresses, sewing things, and some torn dressing gown, destined to be transformed into a dress should the old dress get scorched when cakes are baked for a holiday or wear out all by itself. But the dress will neither get scorched nor be worn out. The old woman is very careful, and the torn dressing gown is doomed to wait a long time and eventually to pass on, in accordance with its owner's will, to some niece of a second cousin, together with all sorts of other junk. Chichikov apologized for bothering her by his unexpected arrival. Not at all, the woman said. What weather to be traveling in. Such rain, such a storm. You ought to eat something after your trip, but it's impossible to prepare anything at this late hour. The words of the mistress of the house were interrupted by a strange hissing sound. The guest was rather frightened, as it sounded as if the room were full of snakes. But then he looked up and realized that it was the wall clock that had decided to strike. The hissing was followed by a rattle, and finally, making a supreme effort, the clock struck 2, sounding as though someone were banging a cracked pot with a stick, after which the pendulum started ticking to right and left again. Chichikov thanked the old lady, declaring that he asked nothing and was only curious to know where he had strayed and whether he was far from the estate of Sobakevich, a landowner. To this the old woman replied that she had never heard the name and that there was no such landowner. At least you must know Manilov, Chichikov said. And who is Manilov? A landowner, ma'am. Never heard of him. There's no landowner of that name. What landowners are there, then? Beevrov, Pigov, Konpatiev, Harpakin, Trepakin, Baldov. Rich, are they? No, my good man. There are no really rich people around here. Some may have 20 souls, others 30 perhaps, but there are none that'll have 100 souls or so, no sir. Chichikov realized that he had strayed into the backwoods. Well then, could you tell me how far it is to the town? I'd say 40 miles. I'm so sorry there isn't anything I can give you to eat, but if you like, you could have some tea. Thank you, ma'am. I need nothing except a bed. That's right. One should rest after such a journey. You should install yourself on this sofa right away. Fetinia, bring a feather bed, pillows, and a sheet. What weather God has sent us. What a thunderstorm. I've had a candle burning before the icon all night. Oh, look at that, my good man. Your back and side are as muddy as if you were a boar. Where did you manage to get so dirty? Thank God it was just a question of getting dirty and not of breaking my side altogether. Holy saints, you must have gone through so much. Wouldn't you like to have your back rubbed with something? Thank you. Please don't bother. Only tell the girl to brush my clothes. Do you hear, Fetinia? The mistress said to the woman who, candle in hand, had first answered the travelers. She had already brought the feather bed and, plumping it up, had managed to fill the room with a stream of feathers. Take this gentleman's coat and the garments he is wearing under it. Dry them by the fire first, just as you used to do for the late master, and then brush them and beat them well. Yes, ma'am, Fetinia said, spreading the sheet on top of the feather bed and putting the pillows in place. So here's your bed ready, the mistress of the house said. Good night, my good sir. Sleep well. Would you like anything else? Perhaps you're accustomed to having someone scratch the soles of your feet for you? My late husband could never go to sleep without it. But the guest declined even to have the soles of his feet scratched. His hostess left, and he immediately undressed and handed all his clothes over to Fetinia, outer and under alike, and Fetinia, after wishing him good night on her own behalf, carried off the whole soaking bundle. Left to himself, he looked with a certain pleasure at his bed, which was almost ceiling high. It turned out that Fetinia was an expert at fluffing up feather beds. When, using a chair, he climbed on top of it, it sank almost to the floor under him, and feathers displaced from its edges flew toward every corner of the room. He blew out the candle, pulled a cotton blanket over him, and rolling himself up like a pretzel, fell asleep within the minute. He woke quite late in the morning. The sun shone through the window straight into his eyes, and the flies, which at night had slept quietly on the walls and ceiling, had turned their attention on him. One landed on his lip, another on his ear, A third decided to install itself on his very eyelid, while a fourth, careless enough to squat down too close to a nostril, got drawn up into his nose, making him sneeze very violently. And it was this that caused him to wake up. Now, looking around the room, he noted that the pictures were not all of birds. Among them hung a portrait of General Kutyazov and one of some old man painted in oils, with red cuffs on his dress uniform such as were worn during the reign of Paul I. Once again the clock emitted a hissing sound, then it struck 10. A female face peeked in at the door, vanishing again immediately, since Chichikov, wishing to sleep comfortably, had thrown off absolutely everything. The face had seemed somewhat familiar to him. He started digging in his memory to find out who it might be, and finally remembered that it was the mistress of the house. He put on his shirt. His other clothes, already dried and cleaned, had been laid out near his bed. He dressed, walked over to have a look at himself in the mirror, and sneezed again so loudly that a turkey cock, who had strolled up to the window, which was very close to the ground, suddenly burst into speech in his rather peculiar language, probably saying the equivalent of "God bless you," to which Chichikov answered, "Idiot." He turned toward the window and started contemplating the sights offered him. The window gave almost right onto the poultry house. At least the small yard outside was full of birds and all sorts of domestic creatures. There were innumerable chickens and turkey hens, among which a rooster was stepping evenly, tossing his comb-adorned head first to one side, then to the other, as though listening to something. There was also a sow accompanied by her brood. Busy digging in a heap of garbage, she distractedly gobbled up a young chick and, without even noticing, went on gorging herself on watermelon rinds. This small barnyard, or poultry yard, or whatever it was surrounded by a wooden fence beyond which stretched vast vegetable gardens with cabbages, onions, potatoes, beets, and other such vegetables. Here and there among them, apple and other fruit trees were scattered, covered with nets to protect them from the sparrows that flitted from place to place in great oblique clouds. For the same purpose, several scarecrows with For the same purpose, several scarecrows with outstretched arms had been put up on long poles, one of them wearing a nightcap of the proprietress's on his head. Beyond the vegetable gardens were the peasants' huts, which, although built haphazardly and not hanged in proper streets, Beyond the vegetable gardens were the peasants' huts, which, although built haphazardly and not ranged in proper streets, displayed signs of their inhabitants' contentment. They were properly kept up. The time-worn shingles on the roofs had been replaced by new ones. The gates were straight, not askew. An almost new spare cart, and sometimes even two, could be seen in the peasants' covered sheds. "But her village isn't that small at all," Chichikov muttered, and immediately decided to have a talk with the proprietress and to get to know her better. He peeked through the crack of the door at which her face had appeared and saw that she was sitting at a table drinking tea. He went in with a cheerful, friendly air. "Good morning, my good sir. How did..." Got to get my tongue ready for this dialogue between Chichikov and Mother Korobotchka. "Good morning, my good sir. How did you sleep?" she asked, rising. She was better dressed now than the night before and had on a dark dress. She had discarded her nightcap, although she still had something wound around her neck. Fine, Chichikov said, installing himself in an armchair. "And how did you sleep, dear lady?" "Not well, good sir." "How was that?" "Sleeplessness. The small of my back keeps aching, and there's a nagging pain in my leg from the hip all the way down to the ankle. It'll pass, ma'am. Don't let it get you down." "May God make it go away. I rubbed it with lard and made turpentine compresses." "And what will you have with your tea? There's some fruit brandy in the flask over there." "That'll do fine, a little swig of fruit brandy." The reader must have noticed that Chichikov, despite his amiability, spoke to the old lady with much more familiarity than he had used with Manilov, and that he did not bother to stand on ceremony at all. It must be noted that if we in Russia have still not caught up with the foreigner in certain matters, we have clearly surpassed him in the art of human relations. It is well nigh impossible to list all the nuances with which we address various people. A Frenchman or German wouldn't even notice all the peculiarities and variations. He would use almost the same tone and the same language to address a millionaire and a mere tobacconist, although, of course, deep down in his soul, he'd do plenty of cringing before the former. But it is different with us in Russia. We have some wise men who will address a landowner with, say, 200 souls very differently from one with 300, and the one with 300 very differently from one with 500, whom again they will treat differently from one with 800, and you can continue thus even to 1,000,000 souls, and you will find all the nuances. Let us imagine a government department, not here, but in some very remote area, and that department has its chief. Please observe him as he sits there among his subordinates. Out of sheer awe, you won't be able to utter a sound. What pride and nobility! What presence! Pick up a brush and paint him. A Prometheus, yes, definitely a Prometheus. He looks around with eagle eyes, and his swagger is smooth and measured. Now this very eagle, when he approaches the office of his superior with his papers under his arm, begins, in his hurry, to look like a partridge. At a party, if the other guests are not of too important a rank, Prometheus will remain Prometheus. But if there are some even a little above him, there will be a transformation such as Ovid himself couldn't have thought up. He is now a fly, less than a fly. He'll shrink into a grain of sand. Looking at him, one thinks, no, that's not Ivan Petrovich. Ivan Petrovich is much taller. This one is so small and puny. Ivan Petrovich speaks in a loud bass voice and never laughs, while this one, damned if I know what sound he's making, like a bird chirping, and he keeps giggling. Then you come closer and you see that it really is Ivan Petrovich. Ha ha ha! You say to yourself. However, let us return to our dramatis personae, Chichikov, as we have realized. Chichikov, as we have realized, had decided not to stand on ceremony, and so he picked up his cup of tea, poured some fruit brandy into it, and spoke as follows.